Okay, everyone, welcome to our mental health workshop in honor of May being Mental Health Awareness Month. We are offering this to the community to support our mental health. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And oops, here we go. Hold on a second. Okay. Oh, and as we're getting started, let's go ahead and just check in with our bodies and notice if there's anything that wants to move, that wants to stretch. Big deep sigh, and go ahead and orient yourself to your space, noticing something lovely in your environment. It could be a plant, could be your pet. So with your eyes, just noticing, and whatever your eyes rest on, notice where you feel that in your own body. Okay. So I'm Mara McLaughlin. I am the founder and lead facilitator here at IRL Social Skills. I have over 14 years experience working with autistic and other neurodivergent youth and their families. I am a member of the Oregon Commission for Autism, and I'm actually autistic certified provider of the program for the education and enrichment of relational skills. And my bachelor's and master's degrees are in communication science. Tori Wright is here with us. Hi, Tori. Tori has a company called Becca. And Tori, what does that acronym stand for again?
It stands for Behavior, Environment, Health, Comparative Analysis, and it's a software app that decodes the language of behavior.
So awesome. And Tori is also she has a long and storied career working in the field, 25 years of behavior analysis and trauma-informed crisis interventions, as well as being the author of 2 books, See Beyond Behavior and See Beyond Emotions. And has written curriculums, hosted podcasts, she's everywhere you want to be in terms of behavior and trauma. And then we have Amanda. Welcome, Amanda. Amanda is the founder of Value Yourself Counseling. She's a certified advanced EFT practitioner, emotional freedom technique, that is, and wellness counselor and international speaker. She has a bachelor's in family science and works with those who are in crisis or healing from trauma. Her website is here, Value Yourself Coaching, and she loves to empower people to access their inner badass. So somatic experiencing. So soma means body. So somatic means of the body. And somatic experiencing is it's an international program that was the life's work of Dr. Peter Levine. It's been about at least 30 years that he's been doing and teaching this modality. And it is with regards to trauma. So trauma is not the event, it's the response to the event. And we have the 4 F's. So the body wants to survive. That is the main prerogative and priority of the body, to survive. And so whenever we are in any situation that is traumatizing, we have the 4 F's, known as fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So the fight response, the body is propelled towards the event. It's going to fight. Flight response, the body is going to go away from the threat. It's going to run. Okay. That freeze response is when the body is, it doesn't move. It's becomes limp, collapses to survive the threat. And then the fawn response, the body is propelled to freeze. It wants to freeze. That's the true expression, but whatever it will do whatever it can instead to please the threat. And these responses happen like faster than we can think. And our body is wanting to keep us safe. And the body will use whichever strategy it determines in a split second is going to keep us safe in that moment. So to be traumatized means that charge, that activation, that rush of adrenaline and cortisol, when it stays inside of us, we experience being traumatized, okay? Because the body doesn't realize that it's survived, doesn't realize it. And so instead of feeling the current reality of safety, like we're in right now, we are safe right now, okay? But instead of our body realizing that, we're stuck in that remembered or anticipated threat, what has happened in the past or what we believe is going to happen in the future. The body expresses trauma in various ways, sensationally. So the body speaks to us through sensation. And the sensations are numerous. And these are some examples of bracing, like pressure, constriction, tightness, chronic pain, numbness, anxiety or overwhelm. Biologically, so like there's the biological responses of increased heart rate, blood vessels constrict, leads to high blood pressure, more muscle tension, more adrenaline, an activated nervous system, and chronic constriction or pain in the body. Behaviorally, the body expresses trauma through having addictions, reacting without thinking, compulsions, social isolation, self-hatred, troubles with sleep, talking really fast, engaging and staying in stressful relationships. And then physically, the expressions could be raised or hunched shoulders, clenched jaws or fists, or head tucked in, a struggle to make eye contact, can be nervous tapping, blushing. So there's many different expressions of trauma in the body. There's behavioral expressions. So like, like having addictions, reacting without thinking, the compulsions, isolating ourselves, having self-hatred, struggles with sleep, talking really fast, having stressful relationships, and then physical expressions of trauma might be raised or hunched shoulders, clenched jaw, clenched fists, or head tucked in, an inability to make eye contact, nervous tapping, twitching, blushing. So we get traumatized because the body becomes alive with charge. And then one of the 4 responses propels us, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, whatever the body thinks is going to keep us alive in that moment. And then the body attunes to its survival. That's the regulation. The charge metabolizes, and then we regulate. And there are several different kinds of trauma, including event-based, when the body or mind experiences an actual or perceived threat. There's developmental trauma, that is chronic traumatic events that take place throughout our development, even before we're born. Intergenerational, that's events that our parents, our families, our ancestors have experienced, ones that we inherited while in the womb, or we learned in our family systems as we grew up. And so animals respond to stressful experiences in a different way. So humans are animals, it's true. However, we've kind of inhibited our natural ability to respond to stressful events. So I'm going to flip over to this video. So I'm going to start by briefing you about this video. It's a video of a polar bear being studied, okay? And the polar bear is tranquilized, which is not shown in the video. It's edited out. So, but it shows us two things. It shows us that trauma is physical and it's stored in the body. The mind doesn't even have to know or possibly remember what happened. In this case, this polar bear that we're about to see is completely sedated. It's not conscious. Yet, as they regain consciousness, this polar bear, their body remembers if there's a threat, and the body like shakes off the threat. In that shaking, in that moment, it gets to actually complete the trauma responses that it wasn't able to complete. So it teaches us two things. One is that the body remembers even when the mind is not conscious or aware. And two, that trauma is able to release if the trauma response completes its cycle. That's our own body's innate wisdom. And so I'm going to share my screen right now and show you how that works. Okay, so the polar bear was running because it's scared. It was scared. It was running from the people who were filming it. You know, the polar bear is a top predator, right? It's not, it doesn't have, there's nothing else that it fears besides, you know, a human coming after it, right? So now I've edited that part out. And so now we see the polar bear, and they are just checking out this polar bear that's completely sedated. And here they are showing the polar bear, and the polar bear is shaking, okay? And even what we're seeing is the trauma release, right? They are, and it's really quite profound. So we see the polar bear, it was earlier, I'm going to back up. So the polar bear was, so this is that fight response. The polar bear's paws were going, the polar bear's mouth was going like it was rawr, you know? And so, and then look, and now there's like a slowing of the polar bear. The polar bear wasn't, and now there's that breath, that big, deep, settling breath that comes. See the diaphragm moving? Mm-hmm. So the polar bear was essentially in a chemical freeze. Okay. The polar bear was in that freeze response, and it was really quite profound to see the exact places where you would want to have that trauma response in the first place. You know, those paws that wanted to fight, the mouth that wanted to yell or roar, you know, and then the belly, there was that deep breathing, that settling breath that came in. And I'm gonna play it again in slow motion. so that we can pay a little bit closer attention to, and I'm gonna do the settings for slow motion. A little bit slower. And seeing this going slow, the like yelling, the roaring, the pause going, running, that's profoundly important to us, because when we're unable to fight back or flee, even adults in a threatening situation, when we go into the trauma response and fawn or freeze, which means we don't respond authentically to the way we feel, and it's not our fault. It's how the body assesses the safety of the trauma response. Okay. So is it safer to fight or flight, freeze or fawn, right? So if the trauma is in our sleep, or even like pre-verbal, or if it's a medical trauma, a surgery, the trauma is invasive, we have this bear has been, poked and prodded, all kinds of boundary violations. These are situations where our body can't fight back, but the charge is in there, okay? And the bear showed us that the body remembers, okay? And by releasing the charge, how it wanted to be released, we also release the trauma. So that is and this is the life's work of Dr. Peter Levine. Somatic experiencing is an international program, and so yeah, they've been doing it for like 30 years, and it's very profound work. And so next we have Tori getting into polyvagal theory. And Tori, I'm gonna go ahead and stop my share and take it away, Tori.
Okay, thank you, Mara, and hello, everyone. Let's see. It's asking me. Yeah, here we go. Let's see. All right. Okay, so everything that Mara just walked us through in terms of somatic experiences and how the body responds to trauma, I'm going to reiterate a little bit of that through the eyes of science in this theory called the polyvagal theory. And it's specifically involving something called our vagus nerve. And what is really amazing about this is this vagus nerve is actually connected to all of our organs. And of course, poly means many. And then the vagus nerve is what is running up and down, all the way down into, our digestive tract, our heart, our gut, our lungs, all the way into our face and our eyes and our nose. So this nerve is really working very hard. And in many ways, that vagus nerve is doing something that Mara talked about, which is that orientating that she had us all walk through. Another term for that is called neuroception. So what neuroception means is, I always like to describe it as if we have these invisible tentacles with all those senses that Mara talked about, scanning and saying, am I safe? Do I feel danger? Do I feel like I'm ready to engage with somebody socially or connect with them? And that's always on, because even when we're sleeping, because it is there to help us survive, which it's a very necessary part of who we are. And as Mara had mentioned, it keeps us alive. And it is, but the tricky part is that as Mara was describing the trauma that sometimes can happen and the body stores that trauma, it gets coded in that vagus nerve. And so then that vagus nerve says, oh, this feels familiar because it smells the same, but yet the situation might not be the same. So my nervous system is going to actually tell me that something is dangerous that might not actually be dangerous, or that a person that I'm interacting with, because they smell like somebody that I didn't have a good reaction to before, that person is not a good person. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this. And when Mara was talking about the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, that is referred to in the polyvagal theory as something called hierarchy. So if you could imagine like a ladder that we're moving in and out all the time, that's what that is. So I feel like Mara set this up so perfectly with everything you were talking about. And that hierarchy is really how it says here the levels of vagal function. But what, another way of saying that is it's literally just how my vagus nerve is scanning and saying what's good, what's bad, and where are we going to go from there. And sorry, before I flip past that, co-regulation, we probably won't talk a lot about today, but I put this on here because this is a big part of polyvagal. And co-regulation is when we, as maybe parents or a friend or an intimate partner, we might hold space and our nervous system is really calm when somebody else's nervous system is having a harder time or becoming dysregulated. So that co-regulation is kind of this process of, with my calm nervous system, I can help somebody else maintain a sense of calm. So again, that neuroception is just that scanning, kind of looking for things. It's identifying through my experience. What have I gone through? Do I have trauma that's going to be triggered? Did I have certain experiences in the past that are now going to contribute how I perceive that environment or that person that I'm interacting with? And here's the hierarchy. So I kind of chose these photos on purpose because they're a good, I'm a big vision person, and I felt like these really captured the essence of each of these states. So again, this is the states that we move in and out of throughout the day. Ventral vagal is really, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute, it's parasympathetic, where I feel calm, I feel safe to connect with other people, I feel like I'm ready to learn information, I can engage at a higher level. So that ventral vagal, that's the person in the center where she's just like, I'm on top of the world and I feel really good. And then you have that sympathetic response, which is where you're specifically the fight or flight that Mara talked about. That's sympathetic response, where everything is kind of rising. Your heart rate's going up, your blood pressure is going up. All of those things are starting to kind of escalate and climb. And I see the sympathetic response is also that it can feel chaotic. That's where I might feel annoyed or agitated, or I feel like I can't really control the environment around me. And then dorsal vagal is really what Mara talked about, the freeze and the fawn. This is where you just feel immobilized. You feel shut down. You feel like you can't really get up easily, or you can't engage, or maybe there's a situation where you feel like your life has been threatened and you literally can't move. So that's that freeze and fawn. And in those states, it gets a little tricky because that's where people get really quiet and they're kind of shut down. And so it's hard to know, is this person just sleepy or are they really in that dorsal vagal response? So I talked about, both Mara and I kind of talked a little bit about all of these big terms, and I just wanted to put it into context because, again, I'm one of those people where it's like, it really helps me understand if I'm talking about my emotions, where are they coming from? What is my body responding to? And so when we're thinking about the autonomic nervous system, so this is our one part of our whole nervous system, and it is responsible, as Mara said, for keeping us alive. It is the sympathetic response and parasympathetic response. Sympathetic response is that activation, like we had talked about, and that's where our brain, so our body sends this information up to our brain, and then our body sends back down these neurochemicals to be able to handle whatever the situation is in the environment. This is where, again, I mentioned this earlier, our increased heart rate, it also starts to restrict our blood vessels because all these things are happening so quickly, it's not flowing very well. Our oxygen isn't oxygenating our blood and our muscles as well. So that's where our tension might start to build. And oftentimes, our heart rate is rising and our blood pressure is rising, and we aren't always aware of it. I think that's what I find so fascinating about understanding the science of this, is that so frequently my body is having this reaction and I'm not even aware. And it might be several minutes later that I'm noticing this tension. I might be noticing that my jaw is a little bit clenched. And then I realize, oh, am I feeling anxious about something? Am I not feeling engaged? Am I nervous? And I kind of have to do a body check and take some deep breaths and support myself. We also have not just slowed breathing, but it's usually shallow breaths, which is going to also contribute to that restriction of blood flow. And ultimately, that's where we start kind of getting into trouble. And in some individuals who have experienced a lot of trauma, they can be in what's called prolonged sympathetic response. And there's a couple terms that maybe some of you all have heard, where it's like hyper aware or hyper attuned, hyper vigilant. These are all things that oftentimes are associated with somebody who stays in that sympathetic response for a longer period of time. Those individuals, I happen to be one of those individuals who I pay attention to everything, not because I want to, it's just because my nervous system has experienced a lot in this life. And so for my nervous system to keep me safe, it feels that it needs to scan on a hyper level. So that means that I might even show up, or people in this state might even show up looking for things to maybe go wrong, or expecting somebody to maybe let them down, because I've experienced that in the past. And my nervous system has sort of created a pattern, if you will, to be in that state. And so I might misread cues because of that. So it's really important to kind of be aware of that, especially if we, ourselves, if we have trauma. I always say that the more aware I am of what's going on inside my body, the more I can kind of evaluate what's really happening. The other thing that happens with that hyperarousal is this can cause sleep disruptions. It can cause a lot of food and gut sensitivities. It even can contribute to some of the sensory sensitivities. And of course, with all of us having different neurodiversities and different things, it sounds similar, but I think that sometimes when we experience neurodiversities, we live in a world that says that we don't fit. And so that's kind of trauma in and of itself. And Mara said the developmental trauma, which it's where you're being repeatedly told that you're not doing it right. And so ultimately, what that can do is that long term, it starts to have a deeper impact on our nervous system and how we're able to regulate ourselves, as well as interact with the people around us. So the cool part about this is that ventral vagal. So this is, again, just going into that parasympathetic. Parasympathetic, by the way, is you actually have to have your sympathetic response in neutral. It can't be activated for parasympathetic to happen, which is that ventral vagal. So if I feel activated in any way, I'm going to have a harder time feeling safe. I'm going to have a harder time engaging socially at all, or even engaging in something where I have to learn or be involved with anything. So that ventral vagal can only happen when I'm not activated in that sympathetic response. So it's really important. I felt like that was a really important part of this, and it helped me really understand myself in many ways. Okay, let's see here. So this is that parasympathetic. It's where everything slows down. You have sustained energy. We hope that we can reach parasympathetic response when we're sleeping, because that's where we rest, we digest. It's also where we regenerate our cells and we restore ourselves. So again, people who have that more higher level of sympathetic response, they're not going to reach this state very often, which is where some of those more troubled things can occur. And all of this is really talking about emotional regulation. And so just kind of tying it all together, our state of being, it could be in that ventral vagal, or we could feel activated in that sympathetic. And I kind of refer to these as like green light, yellow light, red light, just for that imagery. And then dorsal vagal is kind of different. I feel like the dorsal vagal is, again, it's in that freeze and fawn where our body is actually experiencing something almost like a shutdown, really disconnected. In this state, you can also even feel a disassociation. That means you're not really connected with what's going on in your immediate environment. So what does this all mean, and how can we regulate our vagus nerve? Well, it depends on who you are. It depends on what your nervous system has experienced in your life. So it's super important to really get to know yourself. And Mara used a term that's so important, and it's called attunement. So I need to feel attuned and aware and connected to my own nervous system. What that means and looks like is that, as I explained, I want to pay attention to, what is my heart rate doing? Am I noticing that I'm starting to talk a lot faster? Do I notice tension in my neck and in my shoulders? Am I starting to feel hot or sweaty? Because those are all indications that I might be in a sympathetic response. And one of the things that I learned in the polyvagal theory is that our lungs are the single disruptor to the heart rate going up and the blood pressure and all these physiological things. So if I take deep breaths and really start to slow my breathing and making sure that I'm inhaling and exhaling fully and slowing that breathing down very intentionally, now I'm starting to regulate myself again. Each of us needs to really understand our own nervous system, because I've also started to realize that really slow, big deep breaths, inhale, exhale, are actually not as effective as like what's called dragon breathing, where it's like really rapid breathing. That can actually help bring somebody back to a regulated state. So again, this is all unique, and it's something to kind of play with and get to know ourselves and see what works. And this is when we can regulate ourselves, when we can get to that point, that's when we can co-regulate with another person. So translating that nervous system reaction and how we can kind of become a little bit more, it's through observing ourselves and avoiding the assumptions or absent of judgment of ourself. It's just paying attention to what's going on. What are the facts? What's measurable? What's observable? And then also, if I'm observing somebody else or myself, I want to see it from either their perspective or my perspective as much as possible. And then paying attention to how we engage with the environment. This is really, it's so important. It's, what are the smells that are going on? What are the sounds that are going on? What's the temperature or feeling in the room? All of those things contribute to how our nervous system is feeling safe or not. And then kind of just bringing this all together. And I feel like hopefully we kind of pass the torch to Amanda in a beautiful way here, because these are all just, again, different ways that we can help regulate ourselves, but that breathing and movement. So just like Mara was talking about with the polar bear, that polar bear was really experiencing this very traumatic event. They were in the middle of what they thought was a great day, running across the tundra, and all of a sudden their world was just completely changed all in a hot second. And as that bear is coming out of this traumatic experience, Mara was trying to show us the shaking and the breathing that was occurring. And we as human beings, especially in our society, we tend to just sit. We sit still. We don't move a lot. I find that we don't often even pay attention to, am I even breathing really well? Do I have shortness of breath? Am I really making sure that I'm letting my body really relax? Am I checking in with how much tension I have or I don't have? And if I can incorporate or add in any kind of movement with also breathing, now I'm actually helping my nervous system really get back to this much deeper regulated state. And that's where, when that breathing and movement starts to happen, especially together, that's where all of a sudden the oxygen is starting to get to my muscles and through my blood, and I'm starting to relax everything. And I come back into a more regulated state. And then at that regulated state, as I mentioned before, when we become really attuned or really skilled at being able to regulate, now I can help somebody else who maybe has a harder time. And that's where that co-regulation comes in. And that completes the polyvagal. So I'm going to actually stop sharing and hand it over to Amanda. There you go.
All right, before I share my screen, let's go ahead and take a nice big deep breath in together. And then let's get back in our bodies a little bit and shake it out. We've been learning lots of good things. Let's just kind of have a little bit of a wiggle break, shake our heads, shake our brains, and get them ready for some more learning and some practice as well. So I'm going to now share my screen. All right. So I am Amanda Ferret. I'm an advanced EFT tapping practitioner. And so I'm going to breeze through some of the science. But EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Techniques, or you're most likely going to hear it called tapping. And it is a healing tool that combines both somatic practices, so the body gets us back into our body, and kind of that talk therapy piece. And what it does is it helps recognize, honor, and then neutralize and navigate through our emotions. And it's a form of energy psychology that blends both Eastern medicine and Western psychology. And it does that because we tap on acupressure meridian points, which I'll teach you all of those in a minute, while we're talking out loud or while we're doing some kind of neuro-linguistic programming, talk therapy things to kind of get us, the heads and our bodies connected. So we're getting both mind and body connected in EFT. So why use tapping? What happens? Well, tapping helps us relax that sympathetic nervous system that Tori was just talking about. And it calms the autonomic nervous system, calms all the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, and gets us back into a rest or repose state, gets that vagus nerve activated so that we are in that calm place where we can think clearer, interact with people in a more calm and regulated state, and just navigate the world with more response than reactivity. And it moves us from the back and center of our brain, which is the more primal parts of our brain that just function to keep us safe, to our frontal lobes, where we can do some of that higher thinking and again, navigate places, spaces, and relationships with a little more thought, clarity, and control. So this is just a picture of our brain, and all those pieces that you see that are in color, kind of those pieces that are that primal brain that are really activated in sympathetic nervous system. And that kind of pinkish gray area that isn't all lit up and labeled is what we want to use EFT to get to, because that's where all the juicy thinking parts of our brain are that are going to allow us to make those decisions from a calmer state and help us navigate social situations and other things that can be really uncomfortable if we're in that sympathetic, highly activated state. So the basic mechanisms of EFT. First, we're going to talk about the tapping points. So tapping always starts at the side of the hand, so this kind of meaty side of the palm. You can do either hand, You can either tap them together or tap with the fingertips of one hand on the other side of the hand, and it doesn't matter. We use the side of the hand only during the setup phrases, and I'll explain what those are in a minute. And then from the side of the hand, we go to the top of the head. So if you took and drew a line from your nose up and your ears up, where that point meets would be where you would tap at the top of your head. Then for your eyebrow point, it's not right towards the middle top. It's more towards the center, right about where your eyebrows start, just above your eyebrows there, or towards the center, closer to your nose. Then side of the eye, you literally go out from the corner of your eye and tap on the bone right there between the corner of your eye and your hairline. Under the eye is going to be, I've got my nice cheek sinus bones right here. You kind of want to be more out on those instead of closer into the actual sinuses of your nose. So kind of out on the cheekbones underneath your eye. Then under the nose is just kind of right between the base of your nose and the top of your lip. Chin is, I've got a nice little groove there, but again, between the bottom of your lip and the bottom of your chin, right there. Collarbone isn't actually right on your collarbone, but about an inch below your collarbones. And there's kind of, that can be a real sensitive spot for people, but that's what you're looking for, is kind of that sensitive spot. It's a little squishier right below your collarbones. Under the arms, and it's kind of awkward, and I actually typically don't do this position because it actually doesn't feel very comfortable for me. But if you do like this space, you can, it's kind of right where, for us ladies, where the bra bands would meet, right where your hands can kind of reach right under your armpits. And you can do it like this and kind of look like a funky chicken, or you can hug yourself or do one arm at a time. I typically don't use that spot because I'm also disabled and it just doesn't feel comfortable. Then chest was going to be either right kind of under the chest, or I do towards the middle, and it's still the same acupressure point, kind of right there at the base of the sternum. And then wrist is, you just take your wrists and tap them together. And so again, side of the hand happens during setup phrases, and I'll show what that is. And then you just go from top of the head to the eyebrow point, side of the eye, under the eye, under the nose, chin, collarbone, under the arm, chest, and then wrist. And if you were going to keep going, you go from wrist to top of the head. And I'll explain that more as I carry on and we actually get to practice today. So parts of EFT, there's 3 phases within EFT: venting, possibility, and affirmation or new feeling. And you decide what phase you need to start in based on your SUDS, which is the objective units of distress scale. And it's just a scale from 0 to 10, and 8 to 10 is high. That's where you start inventing. So you assess where your emotions are in your body, whether it's anxiety, depression, anger, frustration, overwhelm, whatever is coming up for you and most present, you kind of rate where that's at. So again, 8 to 10 is going to be venting. 4 to 7 is going to be possibility. 0 to 3 is going to be affirmation or new feeling. As I stated before, tapping always starts at the side of the hand and then goes up to the top and works its way back down and repeats. And setup phrases are always done at the start of the hand and at the start or beginning of a phase. The sequence and flow of EFT is not always linear. We as humans often like things to be linear. You start at A, then B, C, D, all the way to Z. Unfortunately, our emotions don't work that way, and our subconscious and our brain doesn't always work that way, meaning we might start tapping on anger, and that anger's at a 9, and we do a round of venting and we're like, okay, I think I'm down to a 7. And you start to do the possibility tapping, and you are introducing some possibility language, and something comes up and you remember why you were mad, and it was really something else than what you thought it was. And now you're angry again and you're back up to a 9. Well, you wouldn't just stick with possibility and then back to affirmations if you're still at a 9. You would follow that 9 and go back up to venting. So it's not always a linear process of one round of venting, one round of possibility, one round of affirmations, and you're done. You follow whatever emotion is most intense and present in the moment. And I am all about accessibility and adaptability. EFT is great that you can change the language to meet your needs. So today, as I demo EFT, if I say something and it's not landing, feel free to change the language in a way that lands for you. Also, adaptability. I don't do the underarm and chest tapping points when I demonstrate it because they're not comfortable for me. I look really funny on video doing it. And so I skip those 2 points. So I go from collarbone to wrist point. So today, that's as I demonstrate, that's what I will prompt. And I prompt you to move through the spot. So don't worry. It's basically like a game of Simon Says, but it's all about mental health. So mental health Simon Says. That's what I like to call it. So let's get started in how we actually do tapping. So if we were to start with the venting stage, again, that's if our SUDS scale, whatever emotion, and I'm going to pick anxiety today, right? Because this is about self-care and social skills. So often if we are having to navigate, somebody that has social anxiety, if I have to navigate a social situation that I'm not too sure about or that's new or foreign to me, anxiety is what comes up. So anxiety is going to be what I stick with today. So let's say my anxiety is at a 9. So if my anxiety is at a 9, I'm in venting stage. And that's where I'm going to use my setup phrases, and they always end in acceptance. So I love and accept myself fully, or I love and accept myself anyway, or I still love and accept myself. And the reason we do that is so that we start to kind of lay that groundwork, lay that pathway within our brain of that acceptance, right? And that we're ending it in a way that feels good, that we're honoring and caring for ourselves. And even though like our brains might not be ready to hear it, we're kind of playing a little trick on our brains by ending those phrases in that way. So it would be like, even though I feel anxious, I love and accept myself anyway. Even though I feel anxious and I feel it in my throat, I love and accept myself anyway. So that would be the venting stage. And I'm going to quickly go through these, and then we're going to go back and actually do it together. So once I did my 3 setup phrases, I would then go to the top of my head and be like, I feel really anxious. This anxiety is so heavy. I feel it really heavy in my chest. And in a venting stage, you're going to stay on the negative. You're not going to introduce any possibility or hope, how I hope I can get rid of this, or I don't want to, you're just staying in the negative. What the emotion is, how heavy it's feeling, and where it's showing up. And the reason you do that is because you've got to get it out. Remember how Tori said you can't get to the parasympathetic until you get that sympathetic calmed down? That's the reason if we are between an 8 and a 10, we've got to vent it all out and get it down before we can start to get our brains and our bodies to calm down and get to a better and more regulated state. So possibility stage, this is if you're between a 4 to a 7. So this is where you're going to adjust the setup phrase to start to introduce new language and the idea of letting go of how you're feeling and moving towards how you'd prefer to feel. So the feelings are still present, but they're not as strong, and you're open to change and letting that go. So this might be, even though I was anxious before, I'm ready to let that go and welcome in calm instead. And I still love and accept myself. And then you're going to, I'm open to letting go of my anxiety. I wonder what it will take to let this anxiety go. When I am ready, I will let go of this anxiety. I'm curious how I can keep myself from feeling anxious in these situations, right? Whatever's possible. So it's that curiosity of like how to let go, how to move through the emotion. You vented out enough. Now you're ready to get to what's next or what's possible. And if it still doesn't feel like you're really quite there, you can always add the when I'm ready, because you're giving yourself permission to get there in your own time. So again, affirmations or new feeling, that's going to be if you've calmed yourself down enough and you're between that 0 and a 3, and you released enough of the emotion that your brain is actually ready to receive the positive language of affirmations. So you've done enough of the work to get that sympathetic nervous system calm down, right? The cortisol and the adrenaline and all that stuff is calming down. Your heart rate is calming down. Your breathing is more regulated. And so some of the things that you can see happen as you tap, because of you moving from that, dysregulated kind of discombobulated state to a more rest repose state is you might feel yourself energetically have a shift in your body. You might start yawning. You might get really tired. My nose itches. That's one of my weird little quirks. You might feel some tingling. Your tummy might rumble, right? Because when we rest and repose, our digestive system can actually work and do its job. So don't be afraid if you feel some like physical somatic symptoms kind of come up as you start to tap. Because again, it's just your body shifting and having that somatic response to moving from sympathetic nervous system being activated to that parasympathetic and the vagus nerve getting activated and being in a calm rest or repose. So once you're in this affirmations, new feeling state, that's when you can use set up phrases to kind of honor and recognize how far you've come. Like, even though I was super anxious before, now I'm calm and ready to stay calm. And I love and accept myself fully. Even though I felt this in my chest so heavy before, now I feel free and I can breathe and I love and accept myself fully. Or if you feel like you're good and you don't want to kind of honor kind of the process you've been through and you just want to seal in those affirmations, you can just go right to the top of the head and be like, I've let this anxiety go. I am no longer anxious. I am calm and ready to go. So now we get to practice this. We're going to go back and do this. And like I said, it's kind of mental health Simon Says, as I call it. So I think everybody's muted, which is good because we don't want to be talking all over each other and then not able to hear. And I'm going to prompt you kind of what to move through. I'm going to say a phrase and then I'm going to leave space. And I want you to tap along and then repeat after me. So you get to actually try out some EFT. And we're going to stick with anxiety, but if you're feeling something else and you feel it somewhere else in your body, again, adapt and change the language as needed. So go ahead and kind of get comfy and get ready. Take a nice deep breath in. And then just start tapping on the side of your hand. Doesn't matter which hand, whatever feels most comfortable. And then repeat after me. Even though I feel anxious, and I feel it in my chest, I love and accept myself anyway. Even though I feel this intense anxiety, and I feel it making my chest really tight, and it's making it hard to want to do things with other people, I still love and accept myself anyway. Even though I want to feel calm, and I want to be able to participate, right now I am really anxious, and I'm feeling it in my chest, and I love and accept myself anyway. Right, top of the head. I'm really anxious. Eyebrow point. This anxiety is showing up in my chest. Side of the eye. It's keeping me from wanting to do the things. Under the eye. The things I want to do with others. Nose. This anxiety is really intense. Chin. I feel it in my chest. Collarbone point. This really intense anxiety. Wrist point. I feel like this anxiety is holding me back. Top of the head. I feel this anxiety in my chest. Eyebrow point. This anxiety that holds me back. Side of the eye. It feels really heavy right now. Under the eye. This anxiety is keeping me, this anxiety is keeping me held back. Under the nose. It's keeping me from doing the things I want to do. Chin. This anxiety is holding me prisoner. Collarbone point. And I feel it so intensely right now. Wrist point. This anxiety that shows up when I want to be social. And we'll just take a nice deep breath there. And like I said, you might feel shifts kind of happening in your body energetically. You might yawn. I always get, again, the nose tingles. But we're going to pretend that that venting stage has moved us now somewhere between a 4 and a 7. And I'm going to practice a linear sequence just so that we can kind of see what each stage looks like. But maybe something would have popped back up and you need another round of venting. For today, for time's sake, we're going to just move through. So we're going to pretend now that we're at a 4 to 7 and we're ready to introduce in that possibility of a new feeling. And that new feeling is going to be calm and like ready to engage with others. So we're going to take another deep breath. We'll start tapping again at the side of the hand. And again, just repeat after me. I'll leave space for you to do so. Even though I was feeling anxious, I'm ready to welcome in calm so that I am ready to engage with others. Because I love and accept myself fully. Even though this anxiety was heavy before, I'm ready to start letting it go. So that I can be ready to engage. Because I love and accept myself fully. Even though I felt anxious before, and I felt it heavy in my chest, I wonder how I can let that out of my body so that I'm ready to engage with others. Because I love and accept myself fully. Top of the head. I am ready to let go of my anxiety. Eyebrow point. I give myself permission to let go. Side of the eye. What will it take for me to release this anxiety? Under the eye. And welcome in calm instead. Under the nose. I'm curious how I can be calm. Chin. So that I can engage with others socially. Collarbone point. I'm ready to let go of the anxiety. Wrist point. So that I am ready to have fun instead. Top of the head. What would it take for me to release all of my anxiety? Eyebrow point. And fill myself full of calm instead. Side of the eye. So that I can have fun with my friends. Under the eye. and release all of the worry I feel. Under the nose, so that I can focus on having a good time instead. Chin, because I'm ready to be calm. Collarbone point. And engage with those around me. Take a nice deep breath there. And again, you would just take note of how your body's feeling, see what emotions are coming up, see what is shifted, and then follow whatever emotion is most present, is heaviest with your suds if you were to be tapping on your own. So again, for time and pretend sake, we're going to say that our suds is now around a 1, we're down between a 0 and a 3, and we're ready to bring in some affirmations and that new feeling of calm and ready to have fun. We've released enough of that anxiety that our brain is ready for our affirmations. And I'm going to skip the setup phrases and we're just going to go right to the top of the head. So another deep breath in, and then right to the top of the head. I am anxiety free. Eyebrow point. I am no longer anxious. Side of the eye. I am now calm. Under the eye. I am ready to engage with my friends. Under the nose. I deserve to have fun. Chin. I deserve to be calm. Collarbone point. I am ready to engage. Wrist point. I am calm and ready for fun. And then I'm going to stop us there just in the interest of time, but you would just continue on with however many I am statements you wanted to say. You know, I always love I am enough, I am worthy, right? Just ending with some good love for yourself as well, because it's all about self-love and self-care. But now you kind of get an idea of what it's like to go through the sequences. So who is tapping for? Tapping is for anyone and everyone. It is an evidence-based practice specifically for anxiety, depression, PTSD, and there is continuing research happening on how it is effective against or for so many things. People use it for habit building, habit cessation, and more. So I know we've got parents and families on here. You can use it with, if you're have trouble falling asleep and sleeping well through the night, you can do tapping before bed. Tori talked about that co-regulation. If you see that your kiddo or somebody around you is starting to kind of be in that sympathetic nervous space and they are having a hard time emotionally regulating, you don't have to even say anything. Just start tapping and hope that they start to mirror you and start tapping. Because the tapping alone is going to help our bodies move from that parasympathetic to the sympathetic. So it's great for if you're experiencing a difficult emotion, if you're facing emotional overwhelm or reactivity, right? You're in that fight or flight for a long period of time. You're stuck in that survival mode, right? You're in that parasympathetic, not getting to the sympathetic, or in the sympathetic, sorry, not getting to the parasympathetic, not getting that vagus nerve activated. So again, remember that impacts us physically, right? Like we're not getting good sleep, we're not having good digestive health, and we're just probably doing, you know, our bodies no favors with self-care and rest and all the other things that we need to take good care of ourselves. It's also great if you're struggling to heal those deep wounds, right? Or trauma that Mara talked about, especially those generational trauma patterns is part of what I do. And it's also great if you need a tool to reconnect to higher thinking. So if you're somebody that gets anxiety around school or learning, or I talked about the social anxiety, right? If you tap before you have something that you know you have to do that typically brings anxiety or fear or frustration, if you tap beforehand, you're going to calm your brain down and be able to have access to that higher thinking. Benefits to tapping with a practitioner. Again, we are going to help you dig deeper into your subconscious and get through blocks or resistance. We're going to help you not have to feel like it's a linear process. We're going to hold you to whatever emotion is showing up the strongest so that we can guide you through the sequence in a way that actually honors the emotions that need to be addressed. And we're also trained to help you keep safe, because our subconscious, once we calm it down, our brains down, will often bring up memories that we're quite not ready for sometimes. And so we can help you put that away without re-traumatizing or re-triggering. The work I do, I work with women and teens on all these kinds of things. I'm going to stop share. I've just got my offers and things on here, but I want to stop share and I want to teach a trick. So I said that for co-regulation and whatever, but if you're out and about and something triggers you all of a sudden and you feel anxiety, anger, fear, frustration, any of those really big, heavy emotions come up and you can't start doing this because that would be really awkward, you can finger tap. So what that looks like is you're going to take 2 fingers of one hand and you're going to tap right alongside the nail beds of the other hand. And you're just going to tap a few times on each finger and then move up to the next finger. And you're just going to keep going. And you can just tap up to your thumb and then back down. And you can talk to yourself in your head if you want to, like, I am calm, I am safe. You can do kind of what Mara talked about, where you're looking for something in your environment. I see green tree. I see clouds in the sky. We're just, again, trying to come back into your body, calm that sympathetic nervous system, and get back into a more regulated state. So finger tapping is great. If you only have one hand, you can take your thumb and tap on your other fingers as well. I have done it when driving because, you know, road rage sometimes is a thing. And so I have, and automatically now I will do it. If I am stressed while I'm driving, one hand just kind of, if I am safe enough to do so, comes off the wheel and I'm finger tapping. Another trick I will teach you is, again, because that vagus nerve and getting back into our bodies, and we've got that tapping spot right here, right on our left collarbone, where you can put your hand, left hand, right on your heart. So you're kind of feeling if your heart needs to calm down. You can feel how your breathing is, and then you can just tap that one little collarbone spot, and that's going to help bring you back. And nobody has to know what you're doing. You can do it so inconspicuously that nobody even kind of knows what's going on. And then you're just kind of regulating yourself. So those are my little tips and tricks that I always like to teach. And also so every tapping point corresponds through, the Eastern medicine corresponds to some sort of system or organ or thing in our body. My 2 favorite tapping spots are under the nose and the chin. And that's because one does the central vessel that runs down the front of us, and the other does the governing vessel down the back of us. So you can literally get the front of your body and the back of your body to kind of calm down, regulate. So you can get your whole body if you just go between these 2 points. And that's another way. You can be sitting at your desk and just kind of tap back and forth, and nobody has to notice. I've noticed myself doing it if I get bored in a meeting and I need to pay back attention. So another thing that I love to give all the tips and tricks. And I know we've got some neurodiversity in the room. I am very ADHD. If I tap in the morning, if I've got a day where I've got a lot of stuff to get through and I know that my executive functioning and task initiation is just not going to happen without some support, I will tap first thing in the morning or before I have to go tackle all those things. And I actually my task initiation is way better, and I have way better executive functioning, and I actually get a lot more done and have a much better day, where I feel a lot better, both mentally and physically. So EFT is just a wonderful tool for that emotional regulation, getting back into our somatic bodies, getting from that the sympathetic to the parasympathetic, getting that vagus nerve reactivated. So I hope that was a helpful way to tie in everything Mara taught us and everything Tori taught us into a tool that you can now use when you need it.
Wow. Thank you so much, Amanda.
You're welcome.
And Tori. That was really awesome experiential learning, and with the theory behind it. So saw some really great questions in the chat regarding shaking or shuddering after trauma. Just curious if this is similar to the way we tremble when angry or stressed enough. Yes, it is similar because the body is trying to discharge that activation. Okay. So it's not, so we go through cycles. We go through, activation, deactivation, activation, deactivation, activation, deactivation, up and down like this throughout the course of the day. Can be, like a minor annoyance, and it could be something that is really triggering. Okay. Tori, you want to tag on to that? Or Amanda, either of you? Please come off mute.
Yeah, sure. So just I think you covered the shaking portion of it. I think that's really just it's really I find it really fascinating because in nature animals seem to just know what to do, so that and that shaking is actually so that you go through the full cycle and you actually don't store that trauma in your nervous system. So I always kind of like to ask the question whenever I'm talking about trauma in those situations is like, gosh, if we went through a really traumatic event or a stressful situation, what if I just like took time to just shake, and whatever. And I feel like we would be so much better off if we were to do that. So perhaps even just giving ourselves permission in those spaces. I know it's just really difficult because there isn't always opportunity to do that. And it might be awkward, as Amanda pointed out, like even with tapping, like, could you imagine just being like, after an event?
Yeah, that would kind of set you apart.
I don't know how many dog owners we've got in the room, but dogs naturally shake off stress. So if you notice sometime, like if your dog has just been through something or had an interaction with somebody that maybe they aren't a big fan of, and they will literally shake it off, that is them shaking off their stress. So I think it's totally worth taking a cue from our pets. And when we can, and it's not awkward, Tori, like shaking it off is totally worth it.
Thank you. And then prolonged sympathetic response. Just how prolonged are we talking about? It's true. Days, weeks, months, years. Yeah, you're right. It does depend. I'm curious if there's patterns or anything there. I mean, it depends, like we'll get, there's PTSD, and then there's complex PTSD, and complex PTSD is a prolonged response, a prolonged sympathetic response, like that's because of a series of traumatic events that haven't been able to be discharged. Great question.
Mara, I might add with the prolonged piece, I think sometimes in developmental trauma, so when the body and mind is developing, I think that prolonged piece, that prolonged sympathetic response is really, that's where we often see it the most with when you were talking about complex PTSD and childhood PTSD, that like those things, those are big terms, but essentially what that's doing is your nervous system in one way, just when we were talking about the shaking too, when we don't shake, when we don't move through the trauma, when we don't have skills like what Amanda walked us through in terms of tapping or breathing or moving our body, when we aren't able to do that, it compounds. So in other words, it builds on itself. And the more it builds, the longer or more prolonged it becomes. And so then in one way, I always refer to like, when we're much older, we're kind of like an onion, where if you've ever noticed, onions have segments, they have layers, and they have membranes in between the layers. So if you really dissect an onion, there's a lot to it. And when you first crack it open, it's like really smelly. But after it's been open for a while, it kind of like, it's not quite so bad. So that's how I like to think of trauma and kind of going through it. And for each person, all of us have, different layers, and they're gonna peel apart easier or harder in those ways. So that was just my add-on on that.
Thanks, Tori. Amanda, you want to add on or?
I was trying to get I've got things in my way of my unmute. Yeah, so tapping can not only be used as an immediate interruption tool for emotions, but part of the healing and trauma work that tapping allows us to do is to go back and interrupt that prolonged, trauma and exposure to being in fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, and reset your nervous system and get you to a place where you can, if something re-triggers or re-traumatizes or something new, there's a new setting event, you recover faster. So that's the other beautiful piece of using EFT. There's a lot of folks that use it as a daily practice to help reset that nervous system, so that we can, again, access our vagus nerve and the things that we need to be in that rest and repose state a lot easier or quicker.
Nice. And then is co-regulation a subconscious thing? Or is it more like walking them through it? So I would say it's the both and in that regard, looking at both of those. I mean, what we find in our classes that parents say, like, I notice when I am regulated, my child is regulated. So, and as the parents, like, we go first, we regulate first, we apologize first, we repair first. And yeah, and in terms of, applying that therapeutically, does anyone want to add on to that?
Sure. I would just add the walking through it might look like modeling. However, I would say the most important thing is just being super, super mindful of your own regulation, like whether you're tapping, as Amanda had walked us through, or if there's something else that you do. I kind of have strategies that I just naturally do from working in this field for so many years. And then I was like, oh, I'm doing that thing because you just kind of become subconscious in that space. But what I found is that once I'm regulated, now I can also kind of talk through what's happening. And I would say that one of the things that can be really helpful is actually identifying not my emotions, but saying, yeah, I just noticed my heart rate was really up and I was feeling really hot. So I'm doing tapping, or I'm taking these deep breaths, whatever it is. And I'm going to do this so that I'm regulated. So number one, you're giving example of what you're doing, but you're explaining why, which is what's happening inside the body so that there's context. And perhaps one day the person that you're co-regulating, they'll do that as well from that modeling perspective.
Nice. And I think that also answers Michael's question about how effective is it if I'm sitting next to someone who's anxious and I tap on myself for them? Is there a transference? That's that modeling component, and our mirror neurons in our brain will be like, oh, automatically. I mean, we feel each other. Our nervous systems are connected. So, yeah, Ed, I like that little hint you gave. And then we're shaking off. I think I know the experience you mean. If I have something really gross, after you put it back down, there's that feeling like cold water being dumped. And but without the actual cold, yeah, just a whole body quake from the head down. Yes. Great. If anyone has any other questions, you can just go ahead, put them in the chat. You can come off mute. And
I have a question for Amanda. Could you share the explanation of the SUDS? What's the word I'm talking about? The scale.
Yeah. So it's the subjective units of distress scale. So 8 to 10 is pretty intense. So that emotion is being felt really intensely. You can't really think or see or do anything outside of that emotion. And that's where you're going to start with venting. Between a 4 and a 7, you're going to be in possibility. So it's still there, but you're ready to kind of see what else is possible or next. And thank you, Mara, for putting that in the chat. And then the venting is, venting 7 to 10 or 8 to 10. possibility 4 to 7, and then affirmations or new feelings from 0 to 3. So that's when you have worked through enough of the stuff, your body and your brain are actually calm enough to hear positive language. Because what happens a lot of times, there's a lot of bypassing that happens in our culture of, oh, and affirmations are great. I'm all for having them all around and using them. But if we are in a state of dysregulation, our brains can't hear them. And they're going to be like, yeah, right, whatever. And so to harness the power of affirmations, we have to make sure our brains are receptive. And that's getting through that venting in the possibility stage. So yeah, 8 to 10 venting, 4 to 7 possibility, 0 to 3 affirmations.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the nervous system should like really be called the relationship system, since it is so formed and founded in relationship. So we can think of it as, how we, that's part of how we are able to relate to others and be, have connection, have social connection. Not only with other people, but also to ourselves, right? It's that interpersonal relationship and our intrapersonal relationship, the relationship that we're having with ourselves. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
I might quote you on that one.
Okay. Do that. We will, if anyone is interested, will we send out the recording afterwards? Yeah, we'll send out the recording afterwards, and as well as the contact information of all of us, the practitioners today. So thank you all for coming, and have a great rest of your month.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Really nice to meet you all.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Yes.
Thanks for the session.
Oh yeah, you're welcome.
And I saw Ed's question. I have a free EFT tapping guide. If you go to my website, you can sign up and get a free EFT tapping guide. It gives all the basics.
You want to put your website in the chat?
Sure.
Cool. Very cool.
Mara and Uma, would you like us to stay on or? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, stay on, please. Yep.
Okay.
See some folks kind of hanging out.
Well, somebody just showed up.
Well, I'll let her in, and then hi Mina. So we just actually finished the workshop. It started at 2:00 Pacific time, but we will send out the recording and other information. Okay. And Casey, it's good to see you.
Wait, should I still be here or?
Do you want to still be here?
I don't leave the option. I think it's like 8%.
Oh yeah. Well, the workshop is done. I don't know how much of it you caught, but
Okay.
yeah. Good to
Peace.
see you. See you later. Bye, bud. All right.
And then there were 4.
And there were 4.